How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. So we're going to go back and revisit the Nancy Guthrie case. We want to talk more about a couple of the missteps that could have been taken by Sheriff Nanos. And the thing here is this. Right now, the news is covering a lot of possibly the bad choices he could have made. I think what me and Russ could do is maybe elaborate on another perspective. I think there are some choices that were bad, and there's really no ifs and buts about it. But there are some choices that are being made that may, if we dive into a little bit more, maybe we can provide a better understanding. Because right now, I get it. There's a bias against Nanos, and we're not here trying to defend him. What we would like to do is show other perspectives into some of the choices that he's making. But we're also going to break down in depth crime scenes. Because that's the one major mistake he made out of many, don't get me wrong, but that's in my mind, the one major one that really opened up the door to his competence in my mind. And that's the one that I think he least challenges because he knows there's an error. So I thought that maybe we could also provide reason behind why he may have done that. And they're really not good reasons, but there's a lot we want to cover. I broke it down into 5 areas. Early investigative missteps in crime scene integrity, leadership, time management, and public trust erosion. Then we got communication failures, media strategy, and conspiracy fuel. And then the jurisdictional friction, so evidence processing, choices, and resource allocation. And finally, political backlash, recall effort, and long-term consequences. The biggest focus we have at the beginning of this will be the crime scene management. So me and Russ have a lot to explain about that. And then we'll go into the rest of the dialogue. But Russ, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I'm a former sergeant with California Department of Corrections. I started my career way back in 1989. Later on, I promoted and eventually got to the point where I retired. After that, I went on to become a senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a private company where I do case management work at a local county jail. I'm also often found here on Tear Talk. I'm also the founder of a Facebook channel called Keepers of Chaos. And I think that about wraps it up. Oh, yes, I am also the author of a book called Killing Complacency, Tactical Awareness for Correctional Professionals. Very proud of that book. And anyway, ready to hash this up, even though I just woke up and I'm only half a cup of coffee in.
All right, so let's go over the 4 standard operational status levels of a crime scene. So guys, bear with me. I'm going to read a couple of things out real quick. So bear with me, Russ, and then we'll break it down. So the first thing is going to be unsecured. Okay, so, and by the way, this is in context because the first argument against Nanos right now is when he released the crime scene. That's a big discussion. You can go to many platforms. That's what they constantly go back to when they talk about his incompetency. Before they move forward to where we're at today, they always go back to him releasing the crime scene a bit too soon. And we always thought that was a concern. If you watch my playlist on this, we always talked that was a concern. That was something we could not understand. But let's just understand the operational status of a crime scene. So first is unsecure. That's the life first phase. So when first responders arrives, emergency still in progress, the victim may be alive, suspect nearby, fire hazmat risk. This is when it's unsecured. They're going in, they're trying to figure out what's happening. What it looks like, there's no tape yet, just police vehicles or a single officer holding the perimeter. Who enters? All life safety crews, EMT, fire, SWAT, plus the first officer. And the golden rule here is this, and I also see this in corrections as well, is life is greater than evidence. Do not tape a perimeter until the scene is inactive. So Russ, just in that context alone, before we get to the next levels, that pretty much sounds correct for you. Unsecured at first, but these are the reasons why it's unsecured, correct?
Yeah, you know, the primacy of life is kind of what dictates at that point. At that point, though, also the victim had been removed. So, you know, they have to go in, and it's less at that point about processing the scene as it is about actually looking for evidence of an immediate valuable nature. And so, that's the premise that you start with. After that, as there's nothing immediately apparent, that's when you start getting into the other types of evidence that we've already spoken about a lot. But those tend to be the things that are forensics. They're looking for fingerprints, they're looking for DNA.
Well, let me
They're
get there.
trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out what is what is missing from the house, and all of that stuff takes time.
Yeah, let me get there because I got that. That's the first part, right? So I don't want to, because I took this down to 4 parts. So you're right. That's what we're going into next. And like Russ said, it's the initial entry. Life comes first. They do expect some contamination of a crime scene at that point, but everything's controlled to some level. They're documenting things. But again, it's the preservation of life. And I love what Russ said. They need to find out what happened to her. She wasn't in the home. So, the first thing is to see if there's anything that they could pick up right away that sees if there's a struggle, she walked out on her own, etc. Then the second thing is the secured lockdown phase. So emergency is over, the event is now inactive, and the investigation is strategic. What it looks like: yellow crime scene tape drawn around the outer perimeter, one controlled entry and exit point, and a crime scene security log is opened. Who enters? Only authorized investigators plus forensic teams. We want names, times, purpose log. Everyone else, including command staff, stand outside, including the sheriff, believe it or not. This is being handled by the investigators, the lead investigators, and the forensic team. The golden rule here is no one touches anything until the initial walkthrough is completed and photographed. So whoever was given the case, you're going to do the walkthrough with whoever you need. And now we're going to start photographing. Now, this takes time. And that is the second part, Russ. And the yellow tape goes on the outside. We're not putting any red tape yet on the inside yet, and we'll get to what the red tape means. But right now we're securing the area with yellow tape. So sometimes in movies, you see people kind of just lifting up the tape and the yellow tape and going through. That's the secured area. That's not the sealed area. The sealed area is usually surrounded in red tape. But with that said, Russ, so now the emergency is over. Now we're going to start bringing in the investigators. So how important is it to have that yellow tape up and have things secured while we figure out what needs to be sealed?
Yeah, and that's where there's a couple of things that leapt out to me in this. One of which was so quickly, going ahead and releasing the crime scene, and then having the FBI come back and cordon it off again. That tends to speak to doing something too quickly. It tends to not being able to have your investigators think deep enough. What is it that we can beyond this point get out of the crime scene? There's some troubling things on both sides of the equation here, though, because this really became a media feeding frenzy, and the media is always going to look at things as outcome based, and that means that if she'd been recovered quickly, no one would have said anything about what was done. What happens is then people start to question what's going on, and the media feeds confirmation bias in a way that's dedicated to receive clicks. And so there's definitely criticism to level here, but I think that we have to be careful about what is it that the media has fed all of us, because we're all tainted by the media, just as that crime scene may have been tainted by leaving it alone too long. And so it's real easy to just start saying, yeah. But I think that we're going to have a more measured approach in this.
Yeah, and guys, the media thing is important. We've done videos on this as well. The media is at fault here, 100%. I know they're painting their narrative, whatever it is, and I know everybody's following that one person. But guys, all the media did was cause division, ruin the element of surprise for an active hostage situation. I get that they're the media and we want to know, but they got to do things that are respectful reporting. And when this, finally they tell the tale eventually, you never know. The media is going to paint their spin and everything's going to point at Sheriff Nanos as the escape. But let's not also, I think they're on different scales. Let's not also forget there's other concerns here, including the media reporting that just kind of reported every update, that stuff that really, in my mind, ruined the element of surprise. And I will tell you one thing: as soon as the house, however, partially, whenever it was given back to the Guthrie family, the landscapers put on signs, no trespassing. That is really for the media. And I don't know how Savannah Guthrie is going to look at her career as a journalist, but I know she's not happy with what's been being said in the media. Again, they're putting the no trespassing signs. So I'm assuming right now that she may want to relook, herself as a journalist. So sometimes we don't realize the stuff that we could do. Now that she's on the other side of it, this could be eye-opening for her. But I just know from what I'm hearing, and I did a video on it in regards to Savannah's frustration with, I think it was Ashley Banfield, lawsuit, counter lawsuit, whatever it is that there was a lot of stuff done here during this case that was really about views and clicks. And I know we follow these people. I get it. But in the end, it wasn't responsible reporting. They really ruined a lot of things that law enforcement was trying to get ahead of. And I think that now that the media is gone and it's a bit more quieter, we may see some stuff moving forward. Okay, so after the secured part, now we have the sealed. That's the core sealed phase. So after the initial walkthrough, before evidence collection begins, what it looks like, you have two concentric perimeters. You have the outer, which is secured. That's with yellow tape. And then you have the inner and the core, and that's sealed. That's usually with red or crime scene do not cross tape with a unique numbered seal on the entry door. That is that's the core. That's different than the secured tape that you see outside, the yellow. And again, what they could have done, to be honest with you, and well, let's not jump ahead. Okay, so who enters? Only the evidence collection team. So that's photographer, CSI, medical examiner. Detectives may enter only with permission. And the golden rule is the seal must not be broken until the chain of custody form is signed. If the seal is broken, the scene is resecured and the breach is documented. So again, you go from unsecured to secured, which is the lesser level, and then the sealed is the final level. And then the final part, Russ, is the release. That's the decommission phase. When all evidence collected, photograph, map, package, chain of custody complete, no further forensic value. What it looks like, tape is removed, a release notice is filed and posted at the property, the log is closed. Who enters? Well, general public, family, utility crews, contractors. The golden rule, the scene is no longer a crime scene. If new evidence is later discovered, the property must be resecured back to level 2 and a new log started. All right, so I got some questions here, Russ, but do you have anything you want to say first? I want to bring all 4 steps connected to Nancy Guthrie real quick, the Nancy Guthrie case, and then maybe see what your thought is once I relate the two. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, so instead of moving step by step, the Pima County Sheriff's Office skipped the sealed phase entirely and jumped from secured, released, to resecured. And that's what I believe. Here's the contextual timeline of the break. So step 1 was unsecured to secured. So within 30 minutes of the 911 call, yellow tape went up around the house. A security log was open. And this was the proper lockdown phase. We're good right now. Step 2, the break. Secured to released was premature. After only 2 to 3 hours, the tape was pulled before the inner core was ever sealed. Why? We don't know. Pressure to show action, misclassification as a search and rescue case, and resource constraints. I mean, maybe they had to reassign deputies to the desert search, but either way, they never established a core seal. Not that I know of, and not that I can find. It just went from unsecured to secured, and then back out to being unsecured. And the result was reporters and onlookers walked right up to the front door. Blood droplets on the threshold were photographed by media before investigators could collect them, and the chain of custody was broken the moment the tape came down. Then there was the damage control, which was the release and resecure. Once the media photos went viral, the sheriff's office realized the mistake and retaped the scene. Problem was, the sealed phase was never done. Not that I think. I think that's what has to be discussed here. The original breach could not be undone. The inner core was already contaminated. So we're going way past what would have been secured. We're going into, because by the door where that blood is, would have definitely been, should have been sealed. So let's see. And then the last four is the last part. Step 4 was sealed. The front door area, the primary scene, was never double taped, never given a unique evidence seal, and never logged as core secure. Consequences, any evidence collected after the resecuring is now vulnerable to suppression in court because the chain of custody is gapped. So Russ, quick takeaway here is never move from secured to released until the sealed phase is complete and the release notice is signed. If you break that rule, the scene is contaminated and the public sees tape on, tape off, tape on as incompetence or cover up. So I wanted to get that out, Russ. I'd like to get your final thoughts on that, just this process here.
Yeah. So, there's a lot that goes on, and there's, I've been involved in some big crime scenes. Fortunately, the ones that I was involved in were actually a lot simpler than this, in spite of the number of bodies that I had to log and stuff. But the thing is that that has to be sacrosanct, and you do not release things until you are sure that you've collected everything. If you go back. If you release it and then suddenly something, especially if something obvious pops up, then there is the potential to lose, that evidence. It's not 100% that you're going to lose it, but boy, it's sure going to be challenging. It's going to make things rougher. I think that with this one, they were looking for a hot lead, and they assumed that they were just going to be able to, go off of what they'd already established. And I think that, they should have got, the FBI in there quicker, turned the scene over to them and said, okay, help guide us through this. Because, we're not used to, dealing with this type of crime. And, there would have been no shame in that. But I think that, just the fact that they were going to stumble around and knowing that they were going to get picked apart by the journalists, no matter what, no matter how they had handled this, it was going to get picked apart. But, why purposely, give the journalists, fuel for the fire, try and restrain that from them. In a way that you can manage the case better. And so I think that, keeping more people on the site would have been better, even if it was only one, making sure everything was preserved until, the FBI got there with some of their, more high-end forensics, I think would have been the right call. And so it just seemed like, this was a rush to get it done and make it look like everything was going forward, but somehow, some way, there wasn't the presence of mind there for them to try and understand what was going to happen with this media circus. And I think it was ultimately predictable. This wasn't something that was unforeseeable. This was something that was going to become the nature of the case. And so I think that does speak to an element of this where that recognition of how this was going to take off occurred.
Yeah, and guys, this is a focal point with the media. I mean, this is something that they always go back to kind of give their anchor to the incompetence, if you will. And then they feed off into newer areas where I think it's obvious that he released it too soon. But I want to make sure that when we look at his other steps that he's taken, I mean, are we really seeing it objectively, or are we really biased by the anchor that the media keeps setting? Because I have to mention, like Russ said, the media is not perfect in this, guys, and they know it. They know it. So now what they're going to do is why there's this gap is they're going to focus on trying to push the eyes off them and back on the sheriff. And unfortunately, the sheriff does make himself a good target, but I think this is a good effort to present the other side. Now, this releasing of the crime scene or unsecuring it, there's really no justification for me. I'm going to provide a couple of things here, but right off the bat, when me and Russ were following this case, we knew that was a mistake from the get-go. We knew that was a concern from the get-go. But so again, the home was secured, released, and resecured multiple times. Reporters photographed blood droplets before the scene was fully protected. Nanos later admitted he should have kept it locked down longer to preserve the chain of custody. Surveillance video, like Ring, garage cameras, neighbor footage, wasn't gathered until nearly 2 weeks after the January 31st disappearance. An alert for footage within a 2-mile radius went out only on February 14th. The FBI and other federal state partners weren't brought in until the case shifted from search and rescue to criminal kidnapping, delaying digital evidence collection, forensic support, and aerial assets. Again, there was no Cessna pilot that was available in the first critical days. That was a concern, and the union made it look like this was like some retaliation type thing. It's just, again, the union also has their own motives. I'm not saying they're wrong. They could be 100% factual, but they also could be very motivated to create a narrative as well, since they're not a big fan of him. So I just want to make sure we paint something a bit more objectively, and that when we kind of draw our conclusions, they're conclusions that are a bit more informed. And experts call the scene re-release a textbook example of contamination that may have allowed evidence tampering during the gaps. And I 100% agree with that. Now, Russ, I have a couple of reasons why I think he could have reopened the scene. Now, I'm not in agreement with any of this, but I want to provide some reasoning. And some of it's not good reasoning, by the way. But okay, so the close and reopen move wasn't likely malicious, but it could have been driven by convergence of 5 pressures. This is what I think. And again, I don't think it's malicious. I don't think it's someone that wanted to screw up the case. So let's put that out there. Russ, right off the bat, we don't think that he did this to purposely screw up the case and in the hopes that the kidnappers or the people that abduct her could get away with it. We know that's not true. So
yeah, I would say that absolutely that's not true. Where I would come back to this is when I try and look at the balance of things that happen, and some of the things that he got dinged for were unfair. One thing that he did that was really good is immediately that morning he called the FBI and asked for their assistance, right? And that was early. That was early that morning of February the 1st. He did call and ask for their assistance. And so when you look at that, that's one thing that he did. He got it out there early that they thought that this was a kidnapping. That gets the public involved. That moves people to be on the lookout kind of thing. Another thing that he kind of got dinged for was the lab that he used. But in a way, that was kind of a smart move because they already had a contract with that lab. And so, that contractual agreement and keeping things all within the line of that one particular lab, I think actually, might have been, enhancing to some of the evidence maintenance.
We're going to cover that. I have that in the second section, but Russ, he didn't call the FBI the first day. It took him 36 to 48 hours. That's one of the concerns.
Okay, because what I've seen is that supposedly he called them at 8 a.m. that morning.
No, he didn't call them till late February 2nd, 36 to 48 hours after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing on the morning of February 1st. He waited. That's a big concern. That's one of the big things that they're talking about in this case, and I was going to get to it. Yeah, he did not call the FBI right away.
Okay,
that's been repeated.
I'm just looking at the reports that I've looked at, and as we know, I'm no big fan of what the media says. So,
Yeah, he definitely didn't call the FBI until 36 to 48 hours, and that's been a concern. That's one of the things that they're upset about. They believe the FBI should have been called in sooner, but we'll get to that because I have that.
Okay.
So, why did he rush to close and reopen? So we have pressure to show action. So families and media demand visible progress. Nanos felt he had to demonstrate the investigation was moving rather than frozen. So I think some people are thinking that he wanted to kind of rush through the house and then release it to let people know that he's moving forward. And a lot of people thought that he may have thought of this as not as initially as a kidnapping or abduction, but that she could have maybe wandered off and that he didn't put enough urgency to it. So a lot of people were speculating that maybe he released it more of vanity and let people know that we're not frozen here. We've done what we got to do. We got enough information. We're going to move forward. That's one scenario. Then you have the misclassification of the case, initially treated as a search and rescue. So elderly women may have wandered, not a criminal kidnapping. And then the search and rescue protocols allow faster scene release. So once they go in, they believe that, you know what, we got to get moving. Maybe it is a kidnapping. Let's get people in. So basically, maybe they wanted to try to clear it quicker so they can get people in to investigate if this was a criminal kidnapping or for a search and rescue, to get the right people in immediately to try to find Nancy in the hopes that she was still alive. Then you have desire to control the narrative. He may have thought a brief release would signal nothing more to see here and redirect attention to the wider desert area, but instead fueled speculation. Then the resource constraints. I'm hearing this as well. Keeping a scene 24/7 secured requires 4 to 6 officers per shift with a short-staffed air operations and ground unit. He may have felt forced to reassign deputies to the broader search. Not likely, but just up there. Could be a reasoning. And the reputation management, an unconscious push to appear decisive and avoid accusations of bureaucratic slowdown, which backfired when the resealing looked like indecision. So the cost was a potentially irreversible contamination of the most critical evidence in the first 48 hours, with blood droplets photographed by reporters before the scene was resecured. So Russ, if you were the incident commander in the first 48 hours, what single policy change or make sure, if there was no change, I doubt, I just think maybe something wasn't enforced, would you make sure it's implemented to prevent the crime scene and surveillance video delays that occurred here?
Yeah, there's no way that the journalist should have been let up on that porch and been able to see those blood drops. That is to me the thing that really fed the frenzy there. And so being able to keep them away and keep them from speculating, because blood drops, that's a really kind of for lack of a better term, salacious kind of thing, where that's where the frenzy started. I think it would have gone there anyway, but that really allowed the media to really start down this path of what's actually being done. Why did they release it with that evidence still there? And they're around trampling around the outside, who knows, peeking over fences, doing what the media does, and who knows what evidence might have been destroyed. They should have been processing that thing in a much more methodical manner, and really kept people back. And I felt like they should have created better lanes of entry, and been able to really go through the exterior areas with a fine-tooth comb. And because it didn't appear that they really did that initially, it kind of makes you wonder about what happened inside the house.
Yeah, and by the way, the blood drops outside the door would have probably been protected information, something that the investigation would have held close, because there are specifics there, in regards to an area that Nancy could have passed through. So I think that when the media was given that chance and they released everything, the Nest camera, the blood, stuff that they were saying inside, that's what also could have led to the ransom notes that I think weren't real. at all. But yeah, I think unfortunately here it opened up the door for the media to come in. You know what? I think Nanos may have known that this was going to get some media attention, and I think his management of this at the very beginning could have been more about how he needed to look. I think so. How he wanted to make sure that the team didn't look incompetent, and maybe his way of doing that was speeding through things instead of slowing things down, which is really the way it should be done: slow and controlled, not speed. Sometimes speed really is just about vanity. It's just to say that, oh, we're past that, we're here, when you're really not, So sometimes you need to slow down. And the reason why I'm saying this may be about vanity is when you look into Sheriff Nanos a bit more and what people say, he is about his image to some extent. I mean, he's not the best at portraying a good image out there. We all know that, but he is about his image. A lot of the concerns he has with staff is really personality conflicts in regards to, instead of maybe every challenge to him he takes personal. Maybe he's so insecure that the moment someone steps up and may have a question, he takes it as a challenge, as a personal challenge. But again, it's more about reputation management. So I do agree with the unconscious push to appear decisive and avoid accusations of bureaucratic slowdown, which backfired when the resealing looked like indecision. I believe some of this may be related to his need to be seen as competent, and in that case, speed things through. So then you have leadership, time management, public trust erosion. So mind you, we set the anchor. We already know that the mismanaging of the crime scene at the very beginning, release, sealing, whatever, securing it, then re-releasing it, or re-release, whatever it is. We know that sets the anchor, but we have to try to look at everything individually. So now this is leadership, time management, and public trust erosion, because now everybody's watching the sheriff's every move. Now, if he was a competent sheriff, the first thing he would say is when you see him at the gym or at a basketball, you probably say, oh, he needs a break. Of course, he's been working hard on this case, but we don't see that with him. So every time he goes to the gym or, maybe goes to a basketball game, he's being judged because right now people want to find Nancy and they believe that he's incompetent. So they look at his stuff he's doing on the side as basically he should be out there more cleaning up the mess he's creating. So what went wrong? So you got multiple reports document Nanos working on usually short days, making frequent gym trips in his convertible, and even attending a college basketball game while a ransom deadline loomed, leading to accusations that he isn't treating the case with the urgency it deserves. His longstanding feud with the FBI, dating to a 2015 civil asset forfeiture probe, appears to have made him reluctant to let the agency take the lead, creating a joint investigation that critics say isn't firing on all cylinders. That was at the very beginning. The media put that out, that there was some beef between him and the FBI because the FBI had investigated him before and that he wasn't willing to be open with the FBI. But that's the media putting that in. We don't even know if that's true. I even think the union may have shared in on some of that, but we don't know if that's true. But it's there. It's something that is in the background that people are trying to draw an inference from. Then you have a $1.35 million unrelated lawsuit, which I covered, alleging a deputy endangered an inmate during COVID-19 and is being cited as part of a broader pattern of failed leadership in Pima County, which, by the way, that lawsuit to me has no weight on anything. I read it. An inmate is basically saying there was no proper protocols recently when a deputy worked in a COVID unit and then went and worked theirs and he didn't, I guess, wash his hands or whatever. I don't think that anything's going to happen with that lawsuit. Remember, inmates are just going to push lawsuits frivolously. So I wouldn't judge that as failed leadership, but the media is taking that and putting it in the pile as failed leadership. Guys, good leaders get sued all the time. Inmates are motivated to make money. They will sue for anything. And good leaders get sued probably more than bad leaders, because they're going to keep trying. The bad leaders, they get the one victory. But for the good leaders, they keep trying until they can try to get something. So I wouldn't take that as automatically he's a bad leader. And then resume discrepancies, reassigning from El Paso PD 2 years earlier than stated, sparked political criticism and made some residents question his overall honesty, even though the department called the errors administrative and unintentional. It could be administrative and unintentional, but at the end of the day, guys, these are just attacks right now because they're there. So anything he does, even if it is an honest mistake, is going to get viewed through a biased lens of incompetent, and now it's getting worse because he was just incompetent, and then it goes to now that he's an outright liar, which sometimes that happens progressively, right? Sometimes you have people that are incompetent, or you view as incompetent, the media attacks them as incompetent, then the person being attacked becomes a bit more hesitant when they start speaking to the camera. Now they're hiding things, now they're being deceitful. So once you attack someone as if they're incompetent, and then eventually it turns into the next aggressive thing. They're lying. They're being deceitful. It keeps the narrative and it makes it more aggressive, but they start with incompetence. So Russ, how should law enforcement leader balance the need for visible hands-on oversight with the risk that personal conduct, so short office days, high-profile leisure activities, undermines public confidence during a high-stakes kidnapping investigation?
So I think that, the fact that the media doesn't have at their disposal everything that's going on. This is the age of cell phones. Anything that could have popped up that needed his attention. Certainly, he was accessible and he was contactable. I think when you start, when you're following a guy around to see where he's going and what he's doing at any given moment, you are putting him into a position as to, wondering, how much he's being looked at and spied upon and tracked. And I think we have to ask the question, did this impede his efficacy to where he had to start, using personal or departmental resources to try and, get away from, what was being pressured on him. I'm not saying that there isn't real, questions about, where he was and what he was doing, but you wonder how much of that is being, affected by him having to worry about everywhere he's going at every given minute. And it just adds another ingredient to the stew, so to speak, that you never know how that's going to end up, impacting the rest of the investigation. So, they wanted to find everything that they could in order to criticize him, and criticism can be warranted, it can be unwarranted, it can be valid, it can be invalid, or it can be, a complete, fabrication. Everything over the period of the past, 10, 15, 20 years suddenly, gets magnified, and the media wanted this to happen. They wanted things to become clickbait. They wanted to be able to get out there and do the breaking story about the horrible, sheriff or whatever. And so they didn't have a balanced approach to it. They wanted to put things out there in order to keep writing stories. And you saw the desperation at the end where, as the evidence dried up and led nowhere, as the rest of the investigation came to a halt, as they started stepping things down, then they were in a frenzy. And you saw them back out there at the house and pointing again, that's the stairs where the blood was found. And it just became this feeding frenzy that went nowhere and helped nobody.
Agreed. And I will tell you one thing, guys. I like what Russ said, because it's kind of on the cover of my my thumbnail. Is at this point here, I'm not saying he hasn't made bad calls. I do think him not calling the FBI right away could have been a concern. But again, we don't know what they thought it was at the very beginning, if it required FBI involvement. But the fact that he did call the FBI, he did call him within 36 to 48 hours, does say that they did know that they needed their insight, but that's also after it became a media frenzy. So he could have did that because he also knew that, people are going to be expecting it anyway. So he could have gotten ahead of it. But I like what Russ said too. Some of the stuff now that they're adding to the mix could just be targeted, that they try to build on those anchors. So yeah, I also would lean on the FBI being a bad decision. Should have been maybe something that should have been called in a bit sooner. I don't know when they fully discovered that this was an abduction or a kidnapping, but it looked like they knew about that pretty soon. So they should have made that phone call a little bit quicker. But what they said, but what I'm saying is that, they lean on these two major faults, right now, and then they'll go ahead and paint that as everything else he did. And now we tend to look at everything a little bit biased. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that he isn't making major mistakes right now, but I just want to be wary as to what we're looking at and what we're judging on, because we're not asking questions out of curiosity. Right now, our questions are leaning towards judgment. So does him going to the gym or a basketball game, I mean, is that a concern, or is someone telling us it is a concern? I mean, he is the guy that's top of the chain. It's not good for view. I'll get that. I mean, public perception. It's definitely not good for public perception. But I mean, is it something that we would automatically judge somebody on if we didn't have these other things in play? Does that make sense, Russ? Am I saying that right?
Well, yeah, I always look at it this way: is that people with very little information make a judgment, and then once they make that judgment, then they seek out evidence to bolster what it is that they've made the judgment about. This is confirmation bias. This is something that we have to be cautious of in what we're doing, on a daily basis in law enforcement, because if you make that snap judgment and then you're only hunting for the nuggets of evidence that bolster what you're looking at. And that's why I immediately, tried to look for some things that he had done correctly. And so, I'll admit it myself is like the first thing that I hear that I think about when the media is involved. I immediately, my default setting is I wonder what they're screwing up now. So we have to look at the totality of the circumstances, and we have to look for balance in there. Did the media do anything correctly? Well, they certainly got the story out there. That was ultimately fruitless because it didn't generate a lead that led to an arrest or the recovery of Nancy so far. But who knows what the eventual proceeds of that helpfulness might lead to at some point. Everyone knows the story now. Someone might see something, someone might say something. But the other things that they did were impediments to the investigation in a lot of ways. So I try and look at it in a balanced way, because I know that I, just like you, are getting fed, force fed even all of this information, and we do something with it, even if it's only subconsciously. And we have to make sure that what we're rendering here is a better version of the truth than what other people might be telling, because I'm just not a big fan of that, doing things merely for clicks. I think that what you have to be doing is you have to be doing something that services the public, that actually moves the ball forward, and not merely calling plays on the sideline.
Yeah, I have some reasons why he may not have called the FBI right away, but to be honest with you, they're not good enough reasons that he would be able to justify. I'll go over them with you a little bit. Let me see. So some are let me see something. Some are. Can we add the pros to this? Um, so most of this is going to be vanity, but some stuff, I mean, could make sense. So let's see. So Sheriff Chris Nanos likely didn't call the FBI right away for a mix of operational misjudgment, bureaucratic inertia, interagency distrust, and political image management. So they're not really good right away because obviously it made sense, I guess, if to call the FBI immediately or quicker than he did. So what happened? So maybe there's a misclassification. So search and rescue versus criminal kidnapping, which I think is the case at first. If I had to lean on something, I think this would be the case, was that they thought it was a search and rescue at first and not a criminal kidnapping. But then I remember him saying very early on in one of the press conferences, that they believe there could have been an abduction. But I don't remember if that came after they found the blood on the front. Russ, could you look that up at all?
Well, the thing that I immediately think about is we know, or I would say that I think it's a safe assumption that they had already found blood in other spots inside the house. And so regardless of whether it was there, the fact that she was missing, that's a predicate crime that's a predicate to a federal crime, which means that the FBI can become involved at that point.
All right, so yeah, Sheriff Chris Nails publicly confirmed it was a. Hold on, I keep on losing it.
And that's regardless of whether it was, whether it was, based on some type of ransom scheme or anything like that. It was, it's apparent that she was, forcibly removed from the property, and so there's nothing in that that changes what the predicate is that she was forcefully removed, and so that makes it a federal
right. But I want it right. So Sheriff Chris Nails publicly confirmed it was an abduction and later a targeted kidnapping before the FBI was formally brought into the investigation. So here's the timeline. His public statements versus FBI involvement. 911 call made. Nanos office treats it as a missing elderly person search and rescue case. So there's no FBI involvement at this point. Okay, so that's the very. Hold on, I keep on losing it. Damn it. So there's no FBI involvement at that point. He thinks it's a missing elderly person. Okay, then it goes to February 2nd, the morning. Nano still uses missing person language. No public confirmation of foul play yet. No FBI involvement. February 2nd, late evening. This is about 48 hours after disappearance. After reviewing the doorbell camera footage, mass figure, and finding forced entry plus blood, Nanos first publicly states it was an abduction and that a masked armed suspect was involved. He says, "We believe she was taken and that the scene showed clear signs of foul play." FBI initiates contact after Nanos has already labeled it an abduction. The Bureau reaches out late February 2nd, not before. February 3rd to the 4th, Nanos confirms a ransom note was received and that the case is now a criminal kidnapping, which is a federal offense. FBI is now on the case, but not in charge. Nanos still controls evidence routing. And then March 12th, Nanos goes further. "We believe we know the motive. It was targeted. FBI has been involved for 6 weeks at this point, but still lacks full evidence access." So the abduction determination, masked armed forced entry, was made by the Pima County Sheriff's Office on February 2nd before the FBI was asked or allowed to take the lead. The FBI reached out on its own after Nanos had already publicly declared it a kidnapping, but Nanos never proactively requested their assistance and limited their role after they offered. So the sequence is missing person, abduction confirmed by Nanos, FBI contacted late February 2nd, and then FBI involvement was restricted. So he didn't contact the FBI. FBI contacted him.
Well, I earlier I misspoke when I said February 1st, but he had made allusion, and that this is what I was looking at there is that he had said publicly that he had contacted them that morning. That's probably a little bit generous since we know that they didn't really get to the house until late in the morning. And so the time at which he called them, he could have been misspeaking. He could have, tried to put it back a little bit earlier than it was. So again, I think that we have to be careful with what sources are saying. Hey, this is what happened, and he didn't call the FBI in because if you look at the actual record, it's difficult to tell. I've been trying to separate it out and nail it down a little bit more, but anytime I read something from the media, I have to take it with a grain of salt, because they have an automatic reflex to put it into a weighted column to try and get those clicks, like I say. So what's actually going on, I think,
I don't think he called them, Russ, because it's also coming from law enforcement personnel. He never. Yeah. It looks like they called him.
Which law enforcement personnel are they? They're citing.
Well, it's coming from Routers and Fox News, and then the local KVOA local. So they said the Nanos called the FBI. No, FBI contacted him first. The FBI was allowed to help only in a subordinate role in the critical early window for thermal searches. So he under federal protocol, the FBI can only assume control of kidnapping cases with an explicit request from the local agency. So once he named it as a kidnapping or whatever, however he named it, then they called to get involved. So after confirming the abduction, masked armed suspect forced entry, Nanos held a press conference declaring it a kidnapping, but did not call the FBI. That's what they're saying. February 2nd, after the press conference, the FBI initiated contact on its own, reaching out to Pima County Sheriff's Office to offer help, maybe because they were also pressured to reach out, or maybe that's the protocol. And the evidence response team, cyber subpoena powers, aerial assets, that's what they came as to do resources. And Nanos allowed limited FBI participation, but refused to let them lead and block their direct access to key physical and evidence, sending it to private Florida labs instead of Quantico. So now the picture, if that's the case, the picture is a bit clearer, though.
Well, it is, but when they start saying law enforcement, said, I just have a reflex.
No, but if you look at the context of it all, I get what you're saying, Russ, but the context does make sense. I mean, does it matter who contacted who? I mean, but technically, it would make. I see. Hey, if this is a kidnapping, why isn't the FBI involved? And the FBI reaching out to him? Because if you look at the reasons, so these are the reasons why he may not have called the FBI right away. So you have the misclassification, which was for the first 36 hours, the Pima County Sheriff's Office treated Nancy Guthrie's disappearance as a missing elderly person search and rescue case. She might have been disoriented, wandered off, or had medical episode. Why it matters? Under standard SOP, search and rescue operations are local first. The FBI is only brought in when there's a definitive evidence of a federal crime. So interstate kidnap and ransom demand, armed abduction. The error, by the time blood spatter, forced entry signs, and the ransom note were fully analyzed, that's February 2nd in the evening, the critical 48-hour window for aerial thermal searches and immediate digital evidence collection had already closed. So they treated it maybe briefly as just someone that could have walked off the property, which she wasn't able to do. She was in a walker. She could barely walk 50 yards. And then again, they didn't see the blood droplets by the door. So I wonder what it looked like in the house, in the bedroom. Then he could have had the desire to keep control. So political image. Nanos built his career on a Tucson solves its own problems narrative. Bringing in the FBI immediately could have been seen as admitting local incompetence or ceding leadership to Washington. He had an ego factor. Multiple sources, including a former political rival and an ex-FBI agent, say Nanos has a strong personal aversion to the FBI, taking the lead stemming from a 2015 civil asset forfeiture lawsuit where the FBI investigated his office. And the result is he could have delayed the request until the FBI initiated contact themselves, then only allowed limited involvement while still controlling evidence decisions. And then you have internal belief. Nanos may have genuinely believed his hundreds of deputies and local K-9 units can handle the search without federal forensic support. Reality, the desert search required thermal imaging aircraft, Cessna with forward-looking infrared, which the Pima County Air Operations was short-staffed for. No pilot was available for the first 72 hours, and there's conflict with that too. And the consequence, by the time the FBI mobile lab and aerial assets were offered, the window to spot a living person in the desert had likely closed. And then you got the fear of federal overreach and evidence seizure. The 2015 FBI investigation into Nanos' office over civil asset forfeiture created a trust deficit. Nanos may have worried that once the FBI was on scene, they would seize control of the entire case and sideline local detectives. And then the evidence routing decision. This distrust is likely why he insisted on sending DNA glove evidence to a private Florida lab instead of the FBI Quantico facility, even though the FBI ordered faster turnaround. But again, Nanos had also said he did it because he was more familiar with the lab and they were already working on evidence at that time. So that could go either way. And then you got pressure to show action without looking weak. Media dynamic in the first 24 hours, families and media demand visible progress. Calling the FBI immediately could have been framed as sheriff can't handle the case. And then the strategic miscalculation. Nanos may have thought he could have solved it locally first, then bring in the FBI only if needed to look like he was doing everything possible. A move that backfired when the scene was contaminated and the FBI involvement was reactive, not proactive. So the moment he released that crime scene, the area got contaminated. Then I think at that point, he probably said, I'm going to reach out to the FBI. Because at this point here, this was a major error, and I want to make sure people know I'm getting help to try to mitigate what just happened. But there are 3 pros here, Russ, or 4. One was for him is a faster, more agile decision making, so no federal bureaucracy. So argument in the first 12 to 24 hours, a small local command team can deploy K9 units, ground searches, and neighborhood canvases without waiting for federal approval. Interagency coordination meetings, or FBI case assignment protocols. The potential upside: if the case had been a non-criminal medical episode, the local team could have exhausted all local leads before escalating to a federal kidnapping probe, avoiding unnecessary federal resource bloat. Then you have protecting the family from national media firestorm. So early FBI involvement often triggers 24/7 national cable news coverage, social media speculation, and prayer chain spam that can harass the victim's family and leak sensitive details like ransom demands, suspect descriptions, family dynamics, and the potential upside: by keeping the case local for the first 48 hours, the family may have been spared an immediate global media siege, allowing them to process the trauma in relative privacy before the story went national, which happened anyway once the ransom note was released. I mean, we see that from TMZ. Leveraging local terrain and community knowledge. Argument: Pima County deputies know the specific desert terrain, the neighborhood layout, and the local suspect profile better than distant FBI agents who may need days to acclimate. Potential upside: a local first ground search could have rapidly canvassed every driveway, garage, and known hideout in the immediate area before federal agents arrive with a one-size-fits-all profile. And the last I got is turf war. Early FBI takeover can sometimes create dual command confusion. Who orders the aerial search? Who interviews the family? Who controls the evidence? Turf disputes can paralyze decision-making for days. And potential upside: by remaining in charge initially, Nanos' office could avoid the dual command mess that later emerged when the FBI was finally allowed limited involvement, but still clashed over evidence routing. So if they called them in too quick, they would be splitting the lead.
Well, okay. So when I go back and we go back a little bit into what you said there with regards to the way the media was reporting some of this. The Nest camera footage wasn't released until February 10th. And when you look back at some of the things that the FBI says, is it looks clearly to me like they were involved from at least February 2 on. So, and that's why I don't like the back and forth with regards to what they're saying about, exactly when the FBI came in or didn't come in. They may have been on a standby mode while they were getting things down. And so that Nest camera footage that took forever for them to get to, the FBI was already well involved by them. But it sounded to me like they couched it like, oh, he waited until then. Well, that's like 10 days later. So by the FBI.
Wait, what do you mean there? I apologize, because they could have held on to the footage and not released it to the public. They could have had that footage from the get-go.
Absolutely. They might have done that, but yet we know that there was problems with getting that because the Nest didn't have it. And so I go back to what Nanos was at least initially probably told at the time. Was he holding things closer to the vest? Possibly. But at that point, remember that it was all about, she had no cloud service. And so it was not recoverable from Nest, and it was never recovered from Nest. It was recovered by some servers that were in the Google network, and that appeared to take forever. And so it wasn't, they weren't waiting to get the FBI involved. They got them from, at least from what the FBI said with regards to the 8 days prior, that they came in on at least February 2nd, from what I see.
Right. So so what I got here is that they volunteered themselves on February 2nd, but here, let me read this. They volunteered themselves on February 2nd. So the FBI was legally barred from leading the investigation until the formal request on February 6th. Even after the request, Sheriff Nanos still controlled the evidence and blocked the FBI from taking the glove DNA to Quantico. The delay in partial access is why so the FBI officially came in on February 6th after a formal request, but it first offered help on February 2nd. It was brought in because the case was a federal kidnapping for ransom with blood, forced entry, a weapon, and a ransom note. All triggers that automatically give the FBI primary jurisdiction once the local agency asks for it. So Pima County Sheriff still has the lead, and the FBI is a support partner, not the lead unless the sheriff office or the victim's family makes a formal request for the FBI to assume control, which I thought there was, maybe that's a big part of the recall they have right now. So it says here they officially became, Sheriff Nanos never made that request. It said federal law says kidnapping that may cross state lines or where the victim isn't returned unharmed within 24 hours is a federal crime. But the Department of Justice policy and the Federal Kidnapping Act says the FBI can only assume primary jurisdiction after a formal request from the local agency or the victim's family. Sheriff Nanos never made that request, and even after February 6th, when he did ask for limited help, he refused to step aside. So the FBI is stuck in a support role, despite having a national database of known predators, thermal imaging aircraft, cyber subpoena power, and behavioral analysis experts, and a proven kidnapping task force model that solves 90% of cases within 72 hours.
Okay, so on February 4th, CBS reports that the FBI was back at the home using canines. So
but whose canines were they?
It says CBS reports that the FBI was back at the home using canines. So and then on February 5th, for the first time, FBI. So they're trying to say they didn't get involved until February 6th, but on February 5th, FBI Special Agent in Charge Heath Janke was at the news conference. So I'm just saying is that the media hinks around with
yeah, but maybe there's a different type of involvement though, because what were they?
Well, I'm not trying to get. They could have been just riding along. I'm not trying to get down in the weeds of the involvement, because then that just becomes the same thing the media is doing. Then it's speculating, and from the time that they do or say something official, I'm just saying.
No. So Russ, it says that you see, it could be wrong, but you said you see the feds before the 6th because the FBI, reached, this freaking thing, it just keeps shifting me. It reached out on its own as soon as the abduction was publicly confirmed, not because they were the leader, because a formal request has been made. So the FBI can offer help without a request under federal. Let me see. The FBI can release surveillance footage they did February 10th, but the process starts February 3rd to the 5th, issue a suspect description, offer a reward, even if they're not. The sheriff allowed limited access. Although Nanos never requested the FBI to lead, he did let a small FBI team into the garage and outside perimeter on February 3rd and the 4th to photograph the vehicle and take some non-biological evidence. Tire tracks, paint chips. That's why you saw federal agents on the property before the 6th. But there was no FBI takeover of the primary scene, no FBI access to the glove or DNA swabs. Those were shipped to the private labs on the 4th, and no FBI-led aerial thermal searches. The first FLIR flight didn't happen until February 7th at formal request. So you saw the feds before the 6th because the FBI proactively offered help the moment the abduction was confirmed, and the sheriff allowed limited non-evidence seizing involvement. The formal handover of lead authority and full evidence access didn't happen until February 6th, which is why the first 72 hours the most critical for finding Nancy alive, were still under local control only. So didn't they take the lead on the digital side of things?
Well, we know at some point, I think it was on the third. I think that they brought in, if I'm recalling this correctly, I don't have it right in front of me. I believe that they brought in some of the equipment from what's it called, the child victim pornography. I can't remember the acronym right now. In order to attach it to her phone and to her base for the pacemaker to get stuff out of there, and I think that was on the third.
Right. So it says here the FBI is why there's something. The FBI is visible and active because the case is federal kidnapping, ransom, armed suspect, potential interstate flight. The FBI is required now to be involved. They have agents on the ground, a command post, and are running background checks. This looks like they're in charge, but they're only assisting. The dual command mess. Critics say the investigation is failing because Nanos is trying to lead a federal level abduction without the specialized tools that the FBI would deploy if they were the lead. The blocking report news headlines say the sheriff is blocking the FBI. That's only possible because he's the lead. If the FBI were the lead, he couldn't block them. So Nanos is the lead. He's always been the lead. The FBI is the support. They are waiting for formal requests to take over, but Nanos has not made that request and has actively refused to let them process key evidence. The problem is the case requires federal resources to solve, but the local lead is hesitant to hand over control, creating a jurisdictional bottleneck that has delayed critical actions. So what I don't understand here, Russ, is if it's a kidnapping, they can't just take the lead automatically.
Well, I think that it's more nuanced than that. I think that it's a matter of what they're calling in and how they're deploying it, and so I think that a lot is being said about what the policy and procedures with regards to the FBI and the sheriff's department are, and I think that what you see there is your typical journalism word salad, and I don't know, because we don't know what's actually going on behind the scenes, what that level of cooperation was. I could foresee that the FBI said, "Hey, we'll just start on it, but at some point, if you want us to jump into the lead role, then we need an actual request." So I think it just gets murky when we start looking at all of policy and procedure and things like that. What the level of cooperation is. Maybe it was really bad. Maybe he was blocking stuff, but I think you have to look at that from kind of a jaundiced viewpoint of the way that journalists do things.
Yeah, and it said even though kidnapping, especially with the ransom demand, is a federal crime under the Federal Kidnapping Act, federal jurisdiction does not automatically erase local jurisdiction. Here's the legal reality that keeps Sheriff Nanos in charge. The concurrent jurisdiction, they both can rule, state, local law. Kidnapping is also a state crime, Arizona revised statutes. The person who committed the crime is just as subject to state prison as federal prison. Federal law, it's also a federal crime if the victim is not returned unharmed within 24 hours or if there's reason to believe they were taken across state lines. The result, both the Pima County Sheriff and the FBI have equal legal authority to investigate. Neither has automatic supremacy over the other unless a specific rule is triggered. Now, the 24-hour rule is not an auto takeover. Many people believe the FBI automatically takes over after 24 hours. This is a myth. What actually happens after 24 hours, the crime becomes a federal offense, which gives the FBI permission to step in, but it does not force the local agency to step aside. The trigger is the FBI can only assume primary command, take the lead if the local agency Nanos formally requests them to take over, the victim's family formally requests federal investigation, and the DOJ agrees to override the local sheriff, and a federal judge issues an order, extremely rare, usually only if local authorities are accused of bad faith or covering up. Why the FBI just can't take it? County professional courtesy. The Department of Justice, DOJ, has a longstanding policy of deference to local law enforcement for crimes that occur entirely within one state unless the local agency asks for help or is unable to handle it. Political reality is if the FBI forcibly took over from an elected sheriff without his request, it would be seen as a massive political overreach and could trigger a constitutional fight over state versus federal power. The blocking power, Because Nanos is the lead, he controls the crime scene, the evidence, and the witnesses. The FBI cannot seize the glove, tow the car, or enter the house without his permission or a specific warrant, which is harder to get if the local sheriff is cooperating but just disagreeing on strategy. When would the FBI take over automatically? The FBI would only automatic unilateral authority in very specific scenarios. They would only have that in very specific scenarios. One is interstate flight, if the suspect is caught in another state with the victim, so driving to Mexico or Nevada. Federal facility, if the kidnapping happened inside a federal building or on federal land. Targeting a federal official, if the victim was a federal judge, Congress members, or FBI agent. Or terrorism, if the kidnapping is linked to a domestic or international terrorist group, the FBI would immediately take the lead. So if they found her or they believe she was in Mexico or in another state, the feds could say, okay, Nanos, that's it. I guess we can come in now. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, I think that those are the things that that delineate things. The other thing to take into consideration is what's happening in the backdrop. The other thing too is you got to remember, even from our position right now, we're viewing it with a level of hindsight that's not available looking forward. Certainly, people can think creatively and put themselves into a position, of what if. But sometimes it's just like if we had known, we would have acted differently. Once again, I'll say it. I think that there's a lot of good criticism to level at this, but when we start, dealing with the journalistic word salads and the confirmation bias and the hindsight bias, we have to be careful, because we don't know how it's being dressed up to present to us.
Yeah, Russ, I actually remember at the very beginning of this case where they were saying the FBI tried to get involved, and they weren't being answered right away. I remember this happening. I do. I 100% remember that. I remember that being reported, and then eventually, yeah, we did see. I think I think there was a later involvement, and maybe they did reach out, and then finally, he connected with them right after this happened. Right after they were when they released the crime scene too early. I mean, we covered a lot right now. I mean, I have other things here, but I think we should. I think there's a lot in this episode right now, because I wanted to talk about the communication failures. But that's going to open up a whole. Maybe we have to do a part 2. It's already over an hour. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say in close? Kind of went abrupt. I don't know if we definitely asked some right questions here, but there was more to explore here. But we're going to have to maybe come back to another 2, because that there's some things in the communication side that's going to go off key. But I think we definitely covered a lot here. Definitely exposed some questions that need to be asked. You have anything you'd like to say in closing?
As always, thoughts and prayers to Nancy and her family. Things look really, really dire though right now, and this is one of those things that now it's probably less about a joyful reunion than it is justice somewhere down the road.
Yeah, and guys, as we try to figure this out, we try to pull the resources, we get the dialogue set. We do have a good foundation, but sometimes we allow ourselves to ask questions and move forward and go wherever the evidence takes you. That's where you see here. You may not see that in normal reporting, because they stick by their story and they do everything to confirm. What we try to do is we try to go where the evidence takes us. And, I have a different perspective now about the FBI involvement. I was trying to give maybe some benefit of the doubt that maybe he had to kind of determine what it was. But like Russ said, I think they kind of knew that right away. And then the FBI reached out and said, I guess this is what you got. And then just not reaching out to them officially and requesting for them until that's the one thing I don't get though. February 2nd, they try to reach out. They're actively, I guess they're kind of showing a support role. And then by February 6th, they were officially moved in. Is that what we're saying here, Russ?
I mean, there's so much murkiness. Once again, I just say it's hard to dig through because of what the journalistas have done here.
I just want to see one more thing for I end, because I don't want to end with more confusion. Let me just just close. I'm going to close off with just this one last thing. I asked for just a quick little timeline. So February 1st, Nancy's family reports her missing. Sheriff office treats it as a search and rescue. No FBI involvement. The FBI has no authority to act on a missing persons report. That is not yet a kidnapping. February 2nd, the morning. Deputies find forced entry, blood, and a ransom note. Nanos still hasn't confirmed abduction publicly. FBI monitors public reports, news, social media, but takes no action. The crime is now potentially federal, but the FBI cannot intervene without a formal request or a public declaration of kidnapping. February 2nd, late evening around 8 p.m., Sheriff Nanos holds a press conference. We believe Nancy was abducted by a masked armed suspect. A ransom note was received. FBI initiates contact within 2 to 3 hours of the press conference. An FBI local field office, Tucson, calls the sheriff's office to offer an evidence response team, aerial thermal support, and cyber subpoena power. So they can stand by, offer help, pre-position resources, run the doorbell camera video through national databases behind the scenes, but they cannot seize evidence, enter the crime scene, or lead the investigation without Nanos' permission. Then February 3rd, Nanos allows a small FBI team, 2 to 3 agents, to photograph the vehicle and take non-biological evidence, tire tracks, paint chips. So they're a support partner, but very limited access. So they can process outside the garage, collect trace evidence that doesn't require a seal, but they cannot touch the glove, DNA swabs, or the ransom note. Those are considered core evidence. All right. February 4th, Sheriff Office ships the glove and DNA to a private Florida lab. FBI objects verbally, but cannot stop the shipment. Nanos is the lead. So they cannot block the shipment, demand the evidence be sent to Quantico, or access the private lab results until they are released. February 5th, ransom notes deadline passes. No payment, no Nancy. The FBI activates its hostage rescue team and cybercrimes unit in standby mode. Pre-task force, there's no official command. So they can prepare national subpoenas for Ring, Google footage, run forensic genealogy in anticipation, brief the family with sheriff's okay, but they cannot issue the subpoenas or deploy the thermal aircraft without a formal request. This makes a lot of sense now. February 6th at 10 a.m., public pressure plus family request plus media outcry. Nanos signs a formal request for FBI's assistance, but does not ask them to take the lead. Officials assisting agency status. FBI evidence response team arrives in full force, tows the vehicle, places a camera on the roof, searches the garage with the sheriff's detectives, and they can collect new evidence, hair fibers, process the car, release the suspect video to the public, issue a $100,000 reward, which they did, but they cannot assume primary command, override Nanos' decisions, or unilaterally send evidence to Quantico. And February 7th, the last, first FBI thermal imaging flight, FLIR, over the desert, 72 hours after the abduction. Active support, still not the lead. They can fly 24/7 map, heat signatures, share data with local deputies, but they cannot order a ground search without Nanos' approval. So that's what you know what? It's kind of what we said. They call, they get kind of ignored. Then finally says, okay, you can send a couple over, but still not official. So they just kind of fly, and then finally he signs to make it official, and then they could do a little bit more. So it makes sense why they were there on February 3rd.
Yeah, and I just did one quick search and did nail it down that ICAC was at the house on February 4th. That's the internet.
Who was?
ICAC, which is part of the FBI, Internet Crimes Against Children. They were at the house on February 4th.
So well, I remember that. So that was part of the limited team, right?
Yeah.
So now the funny thing is, let me ask a question though, and kind of go. So now when you have this limited team in, maybe Nanos could have been worried, because if in their discovery they have reason to believe that it pushes into a federal jurisdiction, he wouldn't want that. So maybe he accepted them first in limitation because he was afraid of what could be uncovered, and then eventually, out of desperation and the push from the public, he wind up getting their full resources. Would that make sense?
Well, I mean, it could, but I'm just going back to things that I can establish, and so we know that they took Cellbrite in there on February 4th, and so Cellbrite is their flagship extraction device for digital forensics with regards to the base, the phone, and that connection to her pacemaker.
And what is it that ICAT, whatever that team are experts
Yeah,
at that,
but
correct?
and that the reason that matters, and the reason that they were called in, is because that the internet crimes against children is obviously a highly specialized thing, and it allows them to really crack these digital leads.
So do you think he had limited FBI involvement at the beginning because he was afraid of what could have surfaced?
Yeah, I just hate to put labels on things like, what, was it limited? Obviously it wasn't unlimited. They act in concert together, but the FBI did bring that unit in, and was going through things, and probably at that point, speculation on my part is, I think that the stuff that they got off of the Cellbrite might have eventually led them to the Google server that had that Nest Cam footage on it. So because that thing that has the ability to really break down where digital forensic leads might be, and so I think that at that point that was probably very instrumental in that.
So I said, do you think he had limited FBI involvement at the beginning because he wanted to cover his bases, but may not want an immediate FBI takeover? It said that's exactly what many critics, former law enforcement insiders, and even some of the Nanos' own deputies believe happened. The strategy appears to have been cover your bases minimalism. Show you're cooperating by allowing a tiny FBI team, 2 to 3 agents, to photograph the car and collect non-biological trace evidence. Nanos would tell the media, we're working with the FBI and avoid the accusation of total isolation, but still keep the lead by not issuing a formal request for the FBI to assume command. He retained full control over when to release or secure the scene, which lab processes the DNA, when to hold press conferences, whether to fly the thermal aircraft, and avoid immediate takeover. Because of the 2015 feud with the FBI, the civil asset forfeiture probe, blah, 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 Nanos may have personally wanted to prevent the Bureau from stealing the spotlight or sidelining his own detectives. So by letting the FBI assist behind the scenes, running the doorbell video through national databases, pre-scanning digital footage, he could see whether their help would actually accelerate the case before handing over control. So this is interesting, Russ. It says, basically, Nanos could be thinking, I could solve it locally fast enough, then bring in the FBI only if I need them. And what actually happened in the first 72 hours, the most critical for finding Nancy alive, were lost because local resources were insufficient. Again, no thermal aircraft, no 24/7 cyber subpoena power. Then he's like, I can use the FBI tools without letting them lead. So the FBI was legally barred from deploying those tools without formal request. The thermal flight didn't happen until February 7th. Then he goes, maybe the private lab will process the DNA faster than Quantico. The private lab is turned around, was not documented and as faster. And the FBI was frustrated because they couldn't verify the results independently. And he said, this is all just thoughts. And then maybe he said, I can control the narrative by being the only spokesperson. The media saw contradictory statements, inconsistent updates, and conspiracy theories fueled by the lack of unified command. So, yeah, it makes sense that I could picture it now. He gets this case, even when it turns into a kidnapping. Now he knows he's got pressure. Better bring him in, but bring him in very limited. And then when media put more pressure, like, what are you doing? Get him fully in. Then he had to step back, get him fully in, but he knew that would open the door to. So maybe if you look at this all in facts, if you look at this in context, then if you look at his behavior, maybe there is a concern with him and the feds working together, which I didn't want to jump at first in my other videos. But if you look at this in context, it's hard to deny that because it kind of fits the pattern. But again, we never know. All right, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.